Chapter 2261. The ashes of the cigarette fell on the back of his hand. It left a burned scar on the back of his hand, but he seemed to be unaware of it. Suddenly, he received a text message from Jesse. "Mr. Goldman, are you free tomorrow? I've worked out a new treatment plan and would like to discuss it with you." A dark glint flitted across Colton's eyes as he stubbed out the cigarette in his hand on the wet soil in the pot. Meanwhile, Jesse was still waiting anxiously for Colton's reply. A man came over and hugged her from the back. "Jesse, who are you talking to?" Jesse shut her phone down and pressed down the disgust in her eyes. "I was just informing my patient's family that we're going to discuss a new treatment plan tomorrow." She turned around to hug the man and continued. "Ronnie, is the thing going smoothly?" Ronald kissed her and replied, "Don't worry. I've spent $40,000 on this. I assure you that you'll see the thing you want to see across all social media platforms tomorrow." She chuckled. "But the one who got hit was your wife. Don't you feel sorry for her?" Ronald scoffed and said, "She's just a lunatic. I would have kicked her out of my house if it weren't for her psychological problems and that I didn't want to share my property with her. But don't worry. Even if she refuses to leave without taking any property after the divorce, I have a way to get rid of her. I won't let her get in our way." The next day, Jessie waited for Colton in the restaurant. She pulled a mirror out to check on her makeup, which she had taken a lot of time to put on, and a smile appeared at the corner of her lips. All men were visual animals. She was able to get Ronald to fall for her by being his wife's psychologist, so she was confident that she could pull the same trick on Colton. Soon, the door to the private room was open. She stored the mirror away and waved her hand. "Mr. Goldman." Colton walked into the private room and sat down on the chair. He looked at her indifferently and asked, "So, what is this new treatment plan that you want to discuss with me?" Jessie poured a cup of wine slowly and said, "The treatment plan is that we're going to carry out a hypnotic induction on Dee. We'll create a dream through hypnosis. Once Dee forgets about those injuries in the dream, she'll think that she's just dreaming and that those injuries aren't real." "I see," Colton replied indifferently. "It sounds like a good plan. By the way, it seems to me that you're very familiar with psychological suggestions, Dr. Blueman." Jessie chuckled. "Well, I'm the expert in this area, after all. Most of the patients have weak minds. Dee is still young. We just need to hypnotize her to forget those unpleasant incidents. I'm sure she'll be cured in no time." After that, she looked at Colton and said, "Mr. Goldman, if you think this is a good plan, I'll go pick Dee up tomorrow." Gina had left great psychological damage on Dee's mind. She just needed to hypnotize Dee. Then she would be able to turn her into her most useful pawn. As long as Colton hated Dee, his relationship with Freya would fall apart. After all, there was no way Freya would let go of Dee since she cared so much about her. Colton looked at the wine cup and said meaningfully, "I didn't realize you were so smart before." She knew how to use her expertise as a psychologist to hypnotize her patients. Jessie thought Colton was praising her. She chuckled and said, "I'm really happy that I can be of use to you, Mr. Goldman." She rose to her feet to offer Colton a toast. However, she tripped herself, and the wine spilled on Colton's pants. She pretended to be sorry and put the cup down. Taking a few tissue papers with her, she said, "I'm sorry about that, Mr. Goldman. Let me help you clean it." Chapter 2262. Just when Jessie stretched her hand over to Colton, he stopped her and pulled out a few tissue papers to clean his pants. No one could tell if he was angry or happy now as he said, "Are you very familiar with doing this kind of thing, Dr. Blueman?" Jessie was stunned. "What do you mean, Mr. Goldman?" Colton lifted his eyes and continued. "I'm talking about seducing other men." Jessie's expression changed, and her smile froze. "Mr. Goldman, I think there must be a misunderstanding." His face sank slightly, but Jessie did not realize it. A faint smile appeared on his face as he said, "There are only two of us here, so I don't think I've misunderstood anything. If you really have a thing for me, I can also give you a chance, Dr. Blue Man. Jessie was shocked. She did not expect Colton to take the bite so soon. Ha, men. They are all the same. But this is a good thing as well. At least I don't have to waste so much of my effort to seduce him. That being said, she still put on a troubled expression and said, but Mr. Goldman, what about your fiancé? Colton chuckled. She's just my fiancé. We're not even married yet. Jessie's heart trembled. Since he has already made it so clear, there's no need for me to reject him anymore. Mr. Goldman, why don't you come back to my room with me? I'll help you to change your clothes. Colton looked at her deeply and said, sure. Jessie brought Colton to the guest room. As soon as she closed the door, she approached Colton and said, Mr. Goldman, let me help you take off your clothes. Colton grabbed her wrist and said indifferently, I'm not the one who should take off my clothes. Jessie's face turned red with embarrassment. She did not expect him to be impatient, and it seemed all men were the same. They liked to get straight down to the business. Jessie took off her clothes one by one in front of him. She stared at Colton alluringly while exposing her body, which she took pride in. Mr. Goldman, I'm all yours today. A smirk appeared at the corner of Colton's lips as he looked at her coldly. You really are such a whore. Jessie was stunned. Mr. Goldman? Since you can't wait any longer, I shall satisfy your desire. Colton opened the door, and a few thugs appeared outside the door before Jessie could do anything. Colton walked to the door and said, she's all yours. The leader of the group grinned and said, don't worry, Mr. Goldman. We're very good at things like this. Jessie's expression changed as the group of thugs walked into the room. She shook her head and shouted, no. No. Stay away from me. The door was closed, and Colton left the hotel indifferently. Meanwhile, the video of Cameron hitting someone sparked outrage across the internet. All of the people were scolding her for beating someone up, and they all wanted to bring her to justice. The video went viral on the internet. It hit the headlines and aroused the police's attention. At the police station, Cameron was sitting inside the interrogation room while a police officer was shouting at her. Gina's relatives came to the police station with her. She cried and said, you must throw this bitch in prison. I want her to compensate me as well, or else I won't let her off the hook so easily. After the police officer calmed Gina down, he turned to look at Cameron and said, you're just an outsider from the East Islands. How dare you beat someone up openly in Bassburg? Now that we have all the evidence, we'll file a lawsuit against you. Cameron sat with her arms across her chest. She lifted her eyes to look at him and said, I admit that I hit her, and that was my fault. However, you cannot file a lawsuit against me without thoroughly examining the incident. It seems like you have someone great to back you up. The police officer's face sank. Miss Southern, this isn't the East Islands. We won't let you get your way here. Cameron chuckled and said, I'm cooperating with you. I admit that I hit her, but what I want is justice. Even if you're going to punish me, you can't just punish me alone. Don't you think she also needs to be punished? Chapter 2263. Gina's face was contorted by her anger. You're the one who hit me. Look at the wounds on my body. We have all the evidence, and now you still want to push the blame on me? We're at the police station now. There's no way you can get out of this. Am I the one who hit you first, or you're the one who hit someone else first, Mrs. George? Have you forgotten the kid that you hit? Is she not a human? Cameron's eyes were cold. Gina's expression changed. She took a step forward and slapped Cameron across her face. Bullshit. Not only did you seduce my husband, but you gave birth to a daughter for him. Both of you deserve to get beaten up by me. A red welt appeared on Cameron's face. She clicked her tongue and looked at Gina before chuckling. Sir, she just slapped me across the face. Are you not going to do something about it? The police officer harumphed and said, this is my place, and I make the rules here. A triumphant grin appeared on Gina's face as she said, did you hear that, Miss Southern? You're an outsider, so you should know your place when you come to Bassburg. It seems like I need to teach you a lesson today. Just when Gina raised her hand and was about to slap Cameron again, the latter lifted her leg and kicked her. The police officer shot up from his chair and shouted, "How dare you do that to her? Somebody! Come over here and teach her a lesson." Two police officers stepped forward and pinned Cameron on the table. Before they could do anything, the door to the interrogation room was pushed open. When the police officer saw the man, his face turned pale. Sheriff Cadogan. Dorian kicked the police officer away, stunning Gina. The police officer scrambled up from the floor and explained, "I can explain this, Sheriff Cadogan. She refused to cooperate with us. That's why we took action on her." Dorian dusted his uniform and said, "Do you think I'm deaf? Our superiors have decided to promote you, and this is how you repay the trust of your superiors? How dare you abuse your authority and take action against people in the police station? I'm sorry, Sheriff Cadogan. Please give me another chance. There'll be no mercy this time. You're fired." The police officer was stunned, and his eyes turned glassy. His life was over now. After that, Dorian looked at another two police officers and said, "And you too. You've violated the code of discipline and brought disgrace to the police. I want you to submit your resignation, pack your things, and get out of here immediately." Dorian released Cameron. When she came out of the police station and saw Whan, who was waiting for her in front of his car, she instantly understood what had happened. She stopped in front of Whan and asked, "Are you the one who helped me?" Whan saw the red welt on her cheek, and his face sank. "Did they hit you?" She turned her face sideways and replied, "They just slapped me once. It's no big deal." Whan ran his fingers over her swollen cheek. She shrank away from it as she felt uncomfortable. She took his hand away and said, "I told you I'm fine. If I hadn't known that Mrs. George had a relative working in the police station, you would have been in trouble." Cameron rolled her eyes and clicked her tongue. "Basburg is so boring. At the very least, I can do whatever I want in the East Islands." Whan chuckled and secured her tightly in his arms. "Did you regret coming to Basburg?" She tried to push him away, but to no avail. "If you don't stop hugging me out of a sudden, I'll start to regret it." Whan laughed deeply and rested his chin on her head. "That means you haven't regretted it yet." Gina was so angry that she gnashed her teeth when she saw the scene from the dark. What a bitch. I must tear off her mask and expose her true face. Not only did she seduce my husband and have a daughter with him, but she's hugging another man in public now. I guess this man is the one who helped her. The following day, the incident of Cameron beating someone continued to spread across the internet. Then, when Gina told the truth in front of the media, everyone was in an uproar. Chapter 2264. Gina told the reporters that Cameron could escape from her responsibilities because she had someone to back her up. She also said that Cameron was a homewrecker who destroyed her family and had an illegitimate daughter with her husband. The title "A Homewrecker Beating Up the First Wife" was spread all over the internet. Some netizens who did not know the truth began their crusade against Cameron, throwing all sorts of nasty insults at her on the internet. Cameron was still unaware of the things happening on the internet. She picked Dee up from the hospital, and just when both of them walked out of the gate, someone threw a bottle of water at them. Cameron hastily pulled Dee away. "Here she is. The shameless homewrecker. She has appeared. The homewrecker is here." A group of people gathered up at the gate. Even the reporters had arrived as well. All of them surrounded Cameron and Dee. "Both of you should go to hell." Someone threw an egg at them, and Cameron stepped forward to guard Dee behind her. The egg landed on her head and slid down her hair in a sticky mess. Her eyes were cold, and she clenched her fists so tightly that they were turning white. The reporters all rushed forward and asked, "Miss, can I know why you want to be a homewrecker? Did you hit Mrs. George because you wanted to replace her? Are you going to make your daughter one of the George?" Cameron lifted her eyes, her face dark. Before she could say anything, Dee shouted, "Back off. Back off. All of you are bad guys." Aunt Cameron isn't a homewrecker. Everyone fell silent, and Cameron turned around to look at Dee in shock. Dee cried, "All of you are bad guys. Aunt Cameron didn't do anything wrong. It was that bad woman who hit me first. We don't know her at all." The reporter asked in shock, "She isn't your mother?" Dee wiped the tears off her face, and her voice was trembling as she said, "I haven't met my mom and dad. I don't even know that bad woman." "Why did you guys scold Aunt Cameron? Why did you beat her? All of you are bad people." The group of reporters looked at each other in astonishment. If Dee was not related to Cameron, then why would Gina say she was her husband's illegitimate daughter? Cameron pulled Dee into her arms and looked at them expressionlessly. "So the so-called reporters are a bunch of people who can't tell the truth? Mrs. George said that I'm the homewrecker, and you guys believe in her? Do you have any evidence?" Someone shouted, "But Mrs. George told us that her husband has cheated on her, and you're the homewrecker. Why did you beat her if you aren't the homewrecker?" "That's right. You beat her because you know you've destroyed her family." Cameron scoffed coldly. "It's true that I beat her, but it isn't because I'm the homewrecker who destroyed her family. I haven't even met her husband before, so how can I be a homewrecker?" However, nobody believed her. All of them thought that she was just making excuses. At that moment, a few luxury cars stopped behind the crowd. A group of bodyguards got out of the cars, and the crowd had no other choice but to make way for them. Whan came out of the car, and a reporter was stunned. "Is he Coleman Goldman?" "No. He doesn't feel like Coleman Goldman. I think he should be Wayne Goldman. I heard that he returned home a long time ago." Whan walked up to Cameron. He took off his jacket and put it over her shoulder. While he was helping her clean the egg on her hair, everyone was starstruck as they did not know what was happening. Whan turned his head around to look at the group of reporters and said, "Who told you guys that my woman is a homewrecker?" The group of reporters fell silent. "She's Wayne Goldman's woman." Those people who did not believe in Cameron felt like they had been slapped across the face. If Cameron was Wayland's woman, then there was no way she could fall in love with Gina's husband. That was unless she was blind. Chapter 2265. A reporter mumbled, "But Mrs. George told us about that herself." Whan chuckled. "Why don't you take your phone out and check the internet now?" The group of reporters and the crowd all took their phones out. When they saw what was happening on the internet, they were stunned. The surveillance camera in the garden had captured the whole thing. It was Gina who was frantically beating up a girl. That was why Cameron was so angry that she kicked her away. Besides, Gina did not tell the media that she had beaten a kid but just that Cameron had beat her up. The netizens began to split into two factions. One faction thought that Gina deserved to be beaten, while the other faction felt that Gina did not do anything wrong since she was beating the daughter of the homewrecker, so the kid did not deserve any sympathy. However, this group of people once again got slapped in their faces when another piece of news came out and revealed that the kid that got beaten up by Gina was the niece of Colton's fiancé. The internet tended to remember everything. The niece of Colton's fiancé was from Yarramore. Her parents had passed away, so there was no way she could be the illegitimate daughter of Gina's husband. Gina had completely made the Goldmans her enemies. Whan wrapped his arm around Cameron's shoulder and asked, "So, do you guys have any more questions for my girlfriend?" The crowd did not dare to say anything anymore. Everything was as clear as day now. Besides, the news about Freya's niece could still be found on the internet, so none of them dared to question the credibility. Whan glanced at them coldly and said, "Remember what you did today." The group of reporters' faces turned pale when they heard what Whan said. It was only now that they realized they had ruined their own careers. At the Seaview Villa. When Freya saw the news on the internet, especially after watching the video of Dee getting beaten up by Gina and being wrongly accused as an illegitimate daughter, she was so angry that her entire body was shaking. Colton pushed the door open and entered the room. When he saw that Freya's eyes were red around the rims while she was staring at the tablet, he knew that she had seen the news. He walked up to the bed and said, "Freya?" Freya put the tablet down and asked, Did you already know this? Colton lowered his eyes and replied, I'm sorry. I didn't want to affect your mood, so. You're worried that I'll blame Cameron? Freya lifted her head. She kicked that woman because she was beating Deedee. There's no reason for me to blame her. I have the responsibility as well. It's my fault that I didn't protect Deedee enough and let her go through so much pain that she shouldn't have to endure. Freya. Colton hugged her shoulders. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm the one at fault. Freya was stunned as she looked at Colton. He took a deep breath and said, Don't worry. I'll give you a satisfactory answer. Meanwhile, at Emperon. Deedee pushed the bedroom door open. Everything in the room, from the walls to the decoration, was colored pink. There was also a crown pattern on the wall that signified the innocence of the owner of this room. The color pink had a soothing effect. The soft carpet, the wooden horse chair, and the fluffy bear doll made the space even cozier. Deedee, what do you think? Do you like this room? Deedee smiled and nodded. Yes, I like it very much. Cameron leaned forward, pinched her nose, and laughed. It's good that you like it. I was worried that you wouldn't like it. Deedee looked at her intently. From the moment Cameron stood in front of her to protect her from the egg, she felt the warmth and protection she had never felt before. Seeing that Deedee was staring at her, Cameron rubbed the top of her head and chuckled. What's wrong? Deedee took her hand. This was the first time Deedee took the initiative to take her hand, and Cameron was stunned. Aunt Cameron, does it hurt? Is she comforting me? When the thought surfaced in her head, the smile on her face broadened. Nope. It doesn't hurt at all. Aunt Cameron isn't that weak. It's going to take a lot to take me down. Chapter 2266. After saying that, Cameron looked at Deedee. In the future, you'll have to become as strong as me, okay? Deedee nodded. Okay. Cameron left Deedee's room and saw Whan standing in the corridor. She placed her hands together behind her back and stepped forward. Deedee likes the room that you prepared for her. Whan lifted his gaze. Glad to hear that. Cameron took a closer look at him. You don't seem to be the kind of man that knows the style and design that little girls like. He chuckled, lowered his head, and approached her. After all, I'm preparing myself for our daughter in the future. She choked on her own saliva, and her cheeks flushed instantly. You. What horse crap are you talking about? Whoever told you that I want to have a baby with you? You pervert. She was about to flee, but Whan pushed her against the wall first. Before she could speak again, her lips had been sealed. He took her breath away with his scalding kiss. Cameron's hands that were resting on his shoulders tightened and soon weakened as she surrendered to the warmth. Whan then moved away from her lips and gently brushed her lips with his thumb. Are you still not going to admit it? Her gaze looked vacant for a second. What's there to admit? Admit that you do think about naughty stuff when I'm around. Cameron choked on her own words. I don't. You're obviously the pervert here. His smirk intensified. I won't deny that. Cameron's cheeks got even warmer, and she avoided his straight gaze. Get off me and out of my way. I'm going to take a shower now. Whan pressed his lips against her ear. Oh, do you plan to wait for me after your shower? Cameron was so infuriated that she bit his shoulder angrily. He frowned slightly, but she did not go too hard on him. Compared to the last time she bit him, she was pulling her punches and showing him mercy this time around. He laughed out loud. Are you the reincarnation of a dog? Why do you love to bite me so much? Cameron let go of his shoulder. You should thank God that I'm not kicking your ass now. He responded with a hum and a hint of hilarity in his gaze. So, are you biting me because you can no longer bear to hit me? Cameron turned her face away. Don't act all smugly. Whan placed his palms against her cheeks and gave her a peck on the forehead. Then I should consider myself lucky. He was glad he had become someone she was reluctant to hit. Ronald slapped Gina. Gina lost her balance and fell onto the couch. She then covered her cheek and glared at Ronald with her bloodshot eyes. You dare hit me? You're lucky that I'm only hitting you. Ronald was so exasperated that he stood with his arm akimbo and pointed at her nose. If you're sick up there, instead of going around town and creating stirs, go find yourself a psychologist and get it treated. You even used the fact that I cheated on you to offend the Goldmans. You bitch, why must every one of us play by your rules just because you're sick? Because of this incident, I'm now being ridiculed by my friends when I step out of the house. The originally negotiated businesses have all come to a complete halt because my wife offended the Goldmans. Everything has been ruined. Gina was trembling with anger and felt extremely wronged. Ronald George, I've been married to you for 13 years and gave up all my youth to give birth to a son for you, and this is how you repay me? By cheating on me? Ronald was extremely impatient. Here we go again. You just have to bring our son up, huh? I dare you to go around and tell everybody that you didn't marry me because of my family status and wealth. You could have said no and rejected me back then. I didn't force you to marry me, did I? This sentence shattered Gina completely. She could not believe that these words actually came out of her husband's mouth. You're saying that I married you only for the sake of your family background? Ronald George, you were the one who courted me, and you're the one who claimed that you'd love me for the rest of your life and that you'd never wrong me in the slightest. I gave up my career, stayed at home, and became a housewife just to better serve you. But what about you? Am I a disgrace to you now? Gina shed tears as she lost hope. Ronald scoffed in disdain and grabbed her face. You did it of your own free will. I never forced you to do so from beginning to end, have I? You're the one who chose to believe in my promises, and now you're blaming me in turn? Chapter 2267. Isn't giving birth the only thing you know how to do in this world? What makes you think you're superior in the family just because you've given birth to a son, and why must I live my life around you? And you even expect me to become your servant when you're ill? Gina glared at him fiercely. Ronald George, you'll go to hell for this. Ronald pushed her away, and she fell to the floor. Since when have you become the judge of my life? Whether I'll go to hell or not isn't something that you can decide. If you don't like what I'm doing, then sign this divorce agreement now. After saying that, he threw a stack of documents at her. The custody of your son can be yours, but with the premise that you'll leave this house without demanding a single penny. Otherwise, I'll make sure that you get nothing out of this divorce. Ronald slammed the door and left. Gina stared blankly at the divorce agreement, looking helpless and pale. I was definitely blind. Why would I fall for such a man back then? After Ronald left the house, he went straight to Jesse's place, but Ronald did not notice that someone was following him from the shadows. Jessie wrapped herself tightly before she opened the door, and when she saw that it was him, she asked with a hoarse voice, "Why are you here?" Ronald hugged her at the door and kissed her. "I missed you, Jessie. But don't worry, I'll soon get a divorce and marry you." He reached out to the hem of her clothes, but that reminded Jessie of what happened yesterday, and she immediately pushed him away. Ronald was a little upset because her expression did not look too good and she resisted. "Jessie, are you regretting it?" "No. It's just that I'm not feeling too well." Ronald did not press the matter as she could no longer run away from him anyway. "Then have a good rest." He was about to leave, but Jessie hugged him from behind. "Don't go, Ronnie." Jessie was actually very irritated, but because of what happened yesterday, she now hated Colton, who was extremely ruthless to her. "It's obvious that my plan to approach Coleman has failed." Ronald hugged her. "Jessie, I know that things have been difficult recently." Jessie chuckled. "That's why you must compensate me well. Don't worry. When I divorce her, I'll marry you right away. However, I have to distance myself from her now. That bitch still has no idea who she has offended." Jessie was startled and puzzled. "What do you mean?" Ronald's expression turned gloomy. "That dumb bitch has offended the Goldmans. And I lost business deals because of her." Damn it. Jessie pursed her lips tightly, and a hint of coldness flashed across her eyes. Is it because Coleman has started to make a move? He's doing all this only for that little bastard? Damn it. Since you're so ruthless to me, then don't blame me for doing the same to you. At the same time, in Emperon, Whan received a video sent to him by the bodyguard. He tapped on the video to view, but did not turn off the sound, so Cameron, who was eating at the side, heard it. Cameron heard Jessie's name and leaned over. Jessie? Soon, she saw footage of a man kissing Jessie at the doorstep. What they were doing was extremely bold and wild. Cameron's cheeks flushed, and she subconsciously took a glance at Whan, but his expression remained unchanged. Do you have such a hobby? Whan tilted his head, stared at her, and raised his eyebrows slightly. We can do the same too. Shut up. Cameron's cheeks became even hotter, and she turned her head away. But she then thought of something and could not help but ask, who's this man? Whan replied indifferently, Ronald George. Cameron understood immediately. So, he's that Ronald George. She did not expect the legendary homewrecker that Gina could not get her head off was actually Jessie. This explains why Ronald would ask someone to get rid of Dee and me, and why Gina would think that I'm the homewrecker. She sneered. Jessie's tactics are quite up there, huh? Not only is she the mastermind behind the scenes, but she also managed to get herself out of harm's way. Even Gina didn't find out about her after so many years. Chapter 2268. Whan smiled. She served as Gina's psychologist before this, so Gina trusts her very much. It's only natural for her not to suspect her. Cameron squinted. All I did was mock that woman for a little, and that's why she's targeting me and slandering me? I really don't understand. What I said to that woman shouldn't be too offensive, should it? So, why would she do something like that to sabotage me? He lifted a lock of her hair with his fingertips. She's not just targeting you. She's mainly targeting Dee. That woman has had her eyes fixed on my brother all this while. Cameron was startled, and her expression dimmed instantly. It turns out that Jessie has taken a fancy to Coleman. No wonder she refuted my words in a panic at the villa the other day. It seems that she had a guilty conscience. Thinking of something, she reprimanded, I'll let the fact that both you brothers look uncannily alike through, but you two do attract a lot of unnecessary attention too, huh? Whan chuckled, rested his arms across the back of her chair, and approached her. Then you should be with me all the time so that you can stop all the unwanted attention from approaching me, isn't that right? She turned her face away. Freya is with your brother too, but why didn't her existence stop that doctor? To put it bluntly, both their looks are just too irresistible to all women. Whan turned her face back and held back his laughter. We're not the same as them. I don't think there's any woman in this world who can beat Miss Southern. All you need to do is blackmail them, and they'll immediately get out of your sight. Cameron was startled as she vaguely felt she was implicated in this situation. This? What does this situation have anything to do with me? Why would I have to blackmail them? Whan wrapped his arms around her, put her on his thighs, and rested his chin on her shoulder. Aren't you worried that I'm attracting too much attention? I'm not. Whan kissed her. You won't even admit this? Cameron was left in a weakened state in his arms, gasping for air. I'm just telling the truth. He laughed out loud, causing his warm breath to brush across her cheeks, and his lips seemed to get in touch with her ears. You want to be with me, which is why such a situation would bother you. Cameron could no longer sit still. She felt that things would become very strange if this were to continue. She got up quickly. I'll go upstairs to see Dee. Whan could not help but laugh as he watched her escape. He immediately picked up his phone and forwarded the video to Colton. The next day, Gina had bought a bottle of sleeping pills and was planning to end things once and for all when the doorbell rang. Gina put the pills back into the bottle, hid the bottle, and went to open the door. She was instantly astounded by the man standing outside the door. It was Leonardo, the secretary whom she had met before this at Black Gold. She instantly guessed the purpose of his appearance at her doorstep. "Are you here to sue me?" "I'll admit everything this time around." "You can sue me however you want." Leonardo smiled. "Mrs. George, don't worry. I'm not here to sue you. On the contrary, there's something that I wish to discuss with you." Gina led him into the house. "Whatever you want to talk about, give it to me straight." Leonardo sat on the couch and took out a document. "I heard that you're filing a divorce lawsuit against Mr. George. I might have a way to help you, Mrs. George." Gina was startled. "You want to help me?" Leonardo smiled. "Yes, I even have a way to make Mr. George get out of this marriage, completely broke." Gina lowered her gaze and asked after a moment, "Why would you want to help me?" "This is what our president wants. The president knows that you've been deceived, so he'll even let what you've done back in our company slide." Leonardo's words stunned Gina. "I've been deceived?" Leonardo looked at her. "I know that you've always wanted to find out who's the woman who's wrecked your family, and I just so happen to possess a video clip here. Do you want to take a look at it?" Chapter 2269. Gina bit her lip and decided to watch it. Leonardo put the phone on the table, Gina picked it up, tapped on the video, and her whole body froze as soon as the video started playing. Her expression looked astounded. How could this? She went through the whole clip several times as her face turned pale, and her hands started shaking. "The woman that Ronald is cheating on me with turns out to be Jessie," she murmured in disbelief. "How could this be? How could it be her? Jessie is the person that I trust the most. Without her treatment over the years, I wouldn't have been able to survive those dark days back then." Gina had always regarded Jessie as her savior and confidant. She would respond to all her requests as long as they were within her capability, but now that she had found out that the woman her husband cheated on her with was her best friend, the news undoubtedly gave her a huge blow, and it hit her hard. "Mrs. George, I've always been curious. You were diagnosed with postpartum depression back then, but why did you go all the way to Asperia to meet Miss Blueman and appoint her as your personal psychologist? It's not like there were no other psychologists in Bassburg." Gina's face was as pale as death as all the blood had been drained from her cheeks. My husband was the one who introduced her to me." After saying that, she immediately realized that this was a complete scam from the very beginning. She laughed out loud, and her emotions became even more hysterical. "I see, so they've been together for a long time, and I've been played by them all this while. I started suffering from postpartum depression after I gave birth to Amos, and I suffered from all that only because I found out that Ronald was cheating on me. At that time, Ronald introduced Jessie to me, and he kindly accompanied me to Asperia for all the treatment sessions. He even offered to stay with me in Asperia for a while, waiting for me to recover. I was so naive that I thought that Ronald was sincerely thinking of me, and I was deeply moved for a while back then. But when we were staying in Asperia, Ronald always went out very early in the morning and came back very late at night, saying that he was negotiating a business collaboration with a company in Asperia. Although I wasn't very happy about that, he was doing so for his career, and I had no reason to refute it. Originally, Ronald only went out early and came home late, but he prevaricated my doubts, saying that he had to work overtime and continued not to come home all night. And because of the sadness that I felt back then, I kept on suppressing my emotions and had to talk to Jessie often. Jessie was patient when it came to guiding me. She even took the initiative to ask me out for dinner and shopping to divert my attention. At that time, I was really grateful to Jessie. When I was at my lowest, Jessie was the person who was there for me instead of my husband. But looking back now, just how ridiculous that period was? Leonardo comforted her. "Mrs. George, you don't have to feel too bad. Since you've seen the true colors of your husband, you have to leave his side as soon as possible." Gina covered her face and cried, "But why would he give up everything?" Leonardo raised his gaze. "You now possess this video, which is a piece of evidence that proves Mr. George's extramarital affair, including your mental condition." Gina lowered her gaze. "But these alone might not be able to force him into giving up everything that he has." Leonardo smirked. Don't worry about this. Our president has come up with a plan. When Leonardo returned to the company, he reported everything to Colton. Colton closed the documents in his hand and lifted his gaze. Contact Mr. Dorian Golding and tell him that he's up. Leonardo nodded. Understood. When Leonardo left the office, Colton leaned back in his chair, and his expression dimmed. No matter if it's the George or Jesse, it's time to end this. A few days later, Ronald and Dorian made an appointment to meet at a cafe, and Dorian placed a stack of documents on the coffee table. Mr. George, I'll be as frank as possible here. I'm your wife's legal representative, and she hopes you'll terminate the marriage and give up all your assets. Ronald's expression changed instantly. What? That crazy bitch wants me to give up everything? Chapter 2270. Dorian picked up his cup of coffee. You cheated on your wife and abused her, not to mention that your wife suffers from severe depression. If you really want to appeal to the court for divorce, I'm afraid your losses will be even greater. Ronald choked on his own words and clenched his fists. Since you're that bitch's legal representative, why are you helping me? Dorian took a sip of coffee. Actually, Miss Blueman asked me to help you. Ronald frowned. What's your relationship with Jesse? Don't get me wrong. Dorian smiled. I have nothing to do with Miss Blueman, but since Miss Blueman is willing to help you by opening some of her connections in the city, it'll surely cut down a lot of workload on my side too. Ronald had always been a man with a clear mind, so he quickly understood what Dorian meant, and his expression turned a lot less stiff. If that's the case, you just said that if I were to bring this matter to court, my losses would be even larger. So, what should I do to recover these losses? There's no way that I'm giving everything up. No way. Dorian looked at him. If you bring this matter to the court, you'll have no room for recovery unless you can get Mrs. George to dismiss the case she has built on you. Ronald sank deep in thought. I originally thought that crazy bitch wouldn't dare to file for divorce and bring the matter to court. I was expecting that she'd compromise and would at most ask for the custody of our son and then give up on everything else. No matter what, turning to a lawyer and filing for divorce in secret is something that I didn't account for, let alone demanding that I give up everything. His expression dimmed. Dorian looked at his expression and gave off a faint smile. Mr. George, I might have a way to persuade Mrs. George into compromising. Ronald asked, what should I do? She cares about her son the most. So, if you can start with your son, Mrs. George will definitely compromise. As soon as Dorian gave Ronald the suggestion, Ronald's body stiffened. But that's my son too. Dorian smiled. I'm not planning to convince you to hurt your son. You only need to put on a show for Mrs. George. Ronald was lost in thought. Dorian left the cafe, took his phone out, and contacted Colton. Mr. Goldman, I've already done everything accordingly. In order to prevent Mrs. George from filing for divorce, Mr. George will definitely buy my suggestion. Coleman responded, nice. Before Ronald makes a move, you should fetch Ronald's son away first, then notify Gina about it. He ended the call and tapped his fingertips against the surface of the desk. Things are about to get dramatic. At night, at Emperon. Cameron came to Dee Dee's room quietly after taking a shower. She pushed open the door, probed half of her head into the room, and saw that Dee Dee was still wide awake. Dee Dee. Dee Dee sat up. Aunt Cameron? She walked into the room with a smile and climbed onto the bed. Dee Dee, can I sleep with you? Dee Dee did not refuse and handed her the other half of her blanket. Cameron lay down immediately and laughed. Dee Dee is the best. Dee Dee also lay down and asked casually, Aunt Cameron, are you afraid of sleeping alone? She smiled awkwardly. Yeah, you're right. In fact, it was not that she did not dare to sleep alone. It was that she was afraid that a certain man would climb onto her bed again once she fell asleep. If things go on like this, my reputation will be at stake. Dee Dee suddenly handed her the teddy bear in her arms. Aunt Cameron, you should hold this. You won't be afraid anymore. Seeing Dee Dee's warm kindness, Cameron took it happily and hugged her. Thank you, Dee. Dee fell asleep almost instantly, perhaps because Cameron was there, so she felt extra peaceful. And Cameron got assaulted by drowsiness and fell asleep rather quickly too. Later that night, in her sleep, she vaguely felt that her body was a little heavy, and she could not move. She opened her eyes in a daze, and under the dim light shining into the room through the window, she saw that Dee was sleeping right next to her, with her back facing her.